historian and cultural preservationist Angela da Silva, next on City Corner. Hi, I'm Sarah Thompson, and welcome to City Corner. On today's show, we're going to dive deep into Missouri history with historian and cultural preservationist Angela da Silva. It's all in connection to the 2021 Mary Meachum Celebration. Now, Juneteenth is just around the corner, and we're going to tie something into that at the very end of the show. But first, we're going to talk about the 2021 Mary Meachum Celebration. Thank you so much for joining me today.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
So I have wanted to talk to you on different occasions about Black history, whether it's for Black History Month. I'm going to say I reached out in full transparency about Juneteenth. And you said, wait a second, Sarah, there's something that precedes that that's really important, a project that you've been working on that you just did. So I thought we could dedicate this show to talking about that. And then before we close things out, we'll highlight some of the Juneteenth celebrations taking place in St. Louis. But first, you had a virtual production and you do something every year, but this time it had to be virtual. So set things up for me about the 2021 Mary Meachum Celebration that you just completed and broadcast that's online right now.
Okay, this is our 19th year since the site was discovered. We do a commemoration around the time of the slave escape. And so we released it last Monday and around that time. And this is the second year we've had to go virtual because historically, the last 17 years has been historically on the site itself, right along the river. And so, hopefully we'll be back to the site. But our goal, the Mary Meachum organization, has been to highlight lesser known aspects of Black history as it is found in St. Louis and the wider world. And so each year we correspond with some historical Black history event. Like in 2017, we had Buffalo Soldiers and Bicycles. Now, what is that? Okay. It was in 1897, it was the lead story across the nation. The military wanted to see if there was a military application for bicycles, and they selected members of the 10th Cavalry to ride all the way from Missoula, Montana to St. Louis in 1897. And their progress was followed across the country in every newspaper. And it was quite an adventure for the men. But again, this is something that is time out of mind that most people never heard of, but we were able to track down, it was only 19 bikes made to specific military specifications for this ride. We were able to bring one of them, one of two remaining, to St. Louis. So wow. That's what we do, is focus on Black history.
Well, I know, as you mentioned, each year there's some angle, some topic. And so I know in the past there's been one about voting. Yes. I think the World's Fair, when you highlighted sort of African Americans at the World's Fair. So talk about the one this year. You had to do it a little bit differently, and it's a full-on production. I was filmed in a studio. So what's the theme of the 2021 celebration?
Sarah, I don't quite understand it, however, but this is the bicentennial of the state of Missouri, and there has been no press about it. And I find it absolutely amazing that a Black organization is the first one out of the box, but it's called Missouri Slave or Free. When you mention the Missouri Compromise, oh yeah, everybody, it clicks, but then you go, all right, what was it? And then,
yeah. It's really hard to explain.
Yeah.
You have to talk to a historian to learn more about it. It's true. It's complicated, right? It's really complicated.
It is, and it isn't. Bottom line, 1818, we were territory. We were Class A territory. And a Class A territory, once they reach a specific number of white voting males, in this case 60,000, they can apply to Congress for statehood. So in 1818, we sent our certified census to Congress. They verified and said, yep, and nothing. Why? Because at that time, the Congress was balanced, 11 states free, 11 slave. Missouri wanted to come in as a slave state. And if Missouri did, the slave states would have the upper hand in the Senate. So they just tabled it. They didn't do anything. Summer of 1819, Maine breaks off from Massachusetts. It's so far north, it's not even open for discussion that it's coming in as free. This leaves the pathway for Missouri to come in as slave. In that process, there's something that when it was approved for statehood, Congress issued something called an Enabling Act. And it is permission by Congress for that territory to sit down and start writing a constitution. They said, yes, you've met all the requirements, go at it. They first met, it was two men elected from each of the counties in Missouri at that time, which I think was 20. They met in St. Louis, but there was too much distractions here. So they moved over to the practical little village of St. Charles. And that's what became the first capital, and that's where they met. Now, Sarah, what is so interesting, you can pull up 15 websites online, and 7 of them are going to say Missouri became a state in 1821. 7 of them are going to say they became a state in 1820. Why is this discrepancy? And I'll tell you why. And see, this is part of the Missouri Compromise. The North didn't want not one more slave state, not at all. And so they, in a compromise, somebody gets something, somebody else gets something else. And what the South got was another slave state, but what the North got was extremely stringent rules, or should I say laws, to allow Blacks to have access to the courts. And that's what most people have no idea what the Missouri Compromise was about. However, we sat down, the compromise was hammered out by Henry Clay, and they thought they had this solved. And so Missouri writes its constitution, submits it to Congress, go ahead, elects 2 senators, Alexander McNair, the first governor of Missouri, and sends their 2 senators to Washington, D.C., and they get the door slammed in their face. Why? Because our Constitution was not accepted by Congress. Now, why? Because there was language in there that said free Blacks cannot live in the state of Missouri. And Congress sent it back saying, you cannot tell our citizens where they can and cannot live. Now, this is interesting because for the Congress, for the first time, refers to free Blacks as citizens, okay? So now Missouri fiddles with the language again and sends it back, okay? Congress goes, what's the matter with you guys out there? Can't you learn? We told you no, okay? I don't care how you rearrange it, it means the same thing, and the answer is no. They kick it back again. The third time they sent it back, again, Henry Clay negotiates what they call the second Missouri Compromise. Ours is the only constitution in the Union that has a codicil, an attachment to it. And what it said was this: he negotiated, says, all right, the language is in there, let it go. But the codicil says the federal government will never, ever allow you to act on it. So there is this attachment, and that was the conditions in 1821 when it was finally accepted. That's why there's 2 different dates out there floating around when Missouri became a state.
There's so much. What I love just listening to you and talking to you is there's so much, so much history, especially local history here in Missouri and St. Louis, and that these are aspects that we continue to forget about as we create this narrative of what we celebrate, of what we honor. And I think it's really fascinating. And what's great about the production that you did for this year's celebration is you look at these different stories, these different, I wouldn't call them characters, but figures, and how this time period that you're talking about, how they each saw it. I want to get into some of those details. This is that time where we have to take a quick break, though.
Okay.
This is the great thing about talking about historians. You can just go, and it's like, here we are already for the first segment. But it's really, really fascinating. We're going to throw up a full-page graphic on the screen. This is where you can get more information or watch what we're actually talking about right now. It's the 2021 Mary Meachum Celebration. It's called Missouri, Slave or Free. You can watch it on YouTube. Just simply visit marymeachum.org. Again, that's information's right there on your screen. marymeachum.org. Don't go anywhere. We're going to have more right after this short break. Please stay with us. We'll be right back.
Operation Wonder Park is a go!
There's nothing more powerful than imagination. But don't just imagine. Use STEM to change the world.
Who's with me?
It's gonna hurt tomorrow.
If she can STEM, so can you. Find out more at She Can STEM.
There's so many reasons to love St. Louis, you can't pick just one. From the arts, architecture, and culture. An all-new development, including the Cortex Community Center. And you're never too far from great music and entertainment.
So come and experience St. Louis.
This is the story of a boy who didn't talk for a long time. The boy liked things to always be the same. Any changes would scare and upset him. The unknown was an unfriendly place. The boy was very sensitive to lights and sounds. So he built secret hiding places where they couldn't get in. The boy didn't like looking people in the eye. He wasn't trying to be mean, it just made him feel uncomfortable. Sometimes he would flap his arms again and again.
One day, I found out I had something called autism. My family got me help. Slowly, I found my voice and learned all the ways I could live with it better.
Early intervention can make a lifetime of difference. Learn the signs at autismspeaks.org.
It takes less than 1 minute to find out if you may have prediabetes, and you can do it here. So what are you waiting for? Just go to the site.
Hi, I'm Sarah Thompson, and welcome back to City Corner. Today, I'm speaking with Angela da Silva, historian, cultural preservationist, and adjunct professor at Lindenwood University. Thank you again. Thank you again for joining me. It's such a pleasure to speak with you.
Yeah, thanks.
I love that I can use this show as my history lesson, but I hope people at home will too, because you have such interesting information. And I want to come back to this year's 2021 Mary Meachum Celebration, because what I thought was so interesting was the different narratives that are in there to talk about Missouri as a free or what it's called slave or free. And so we've got we've got York, who was a slave connected to Lewis and Clark. Talk about why you chose these different people to highlight in this year's celebration and this online production that you did.
York and William Clark actually grew up together. He was Clark's personal body servant, if you will. I mean, they went through childhood together. And when Lewis and Clark were charged to go out west, of course, he takes York. But York is a very big man. He's very tall, very powerfully built, and crack shot with a rifle. Along the way, Indians had never saw a Black man. And so he was like their entry card into a lot of native villages. And even as they were going up the river, word beat them about this Black man. And what most people don't know is that Indian warriors, when they had a big buffalo kill, or they did something huge like, wrestle a grizzly or whatever, they would come back and rub Black ashes on their body as a purification. So here is this Black giant coming up the river, and they're just awestruck that he is. They call him Big Medicine, and little kids are constantly around him. Women are just oogling him. I mean, he's just this powerful representation of Black people. And a lot of times through the various mishaps along the way, quite a few times York saves the entire group. But when they get back, he has been gone 4 years. His wife is in Kentucky. He begs William Clark to go visit her. He hasn't seen her in 4 years, and he tells him no. He goes anyway. And comes back, I'd like to say, under his own steam, okay? And he's beat for it. There, you can't find that, even NPS has not been able to find whether or not William Clark ever freed York. Now, this is amazing to me. So the debasement of Blacks didn't start on this particular land with statehood. It's happened in the territorial period.
In this production, before we segue into our one other topic, there's a little nugget of history that you mentioned in here that's pretty important, and it sort of slipped in there. You mentioned Daniel Boone. Can you allude to what it is that you share in this production?
Yes, and I highly recommend everybody see this, because it's not. There are several books that I based that story on, but there's another one coming out on June the 8th called Forget the Alamo that's going to be talking about this even more. Well, allegedly, okay, allegedly. And so that's for the legal purposes. Daniel Boone had a Black daughter. Okay, her name was Elizabeth. Dr. Young followed Daniel Boone here to Missouri, uprooted his entire plantation, 30 plus slaves, gets a land grant from the Spanish and moves over here on the Missouri River. He creates a town called Marthasville, named after his wife. But his prize slave was Elizabeth. Now, Elizabeth, when she gets to Missouri, has 7 children. And the books say, or the history says, they were all different colors. Now, Elizabeth's 2 kids, last 2 Kentucky-born sons, will become world famous. The youngest one will be taken into Dr. Young's house around 7 or 8 and trained to be a house servant. The other one will, this family will stay together as a unit, but then actually be sold to a Mr. Mansfield here in downtown St. Louis. To make a long story very short, the youngest son, both the youngest and next youngest, will run away. But when Mansfield gets the family, here in St. Louis, he absconds like a lot of people in 1830, 1840. Over 100,000 slaves were taken from Missouri to Texas. And Mansfield will take his Black family, slaves, to Texas. And so down there, he runs into more financial problem, and her second youngest son, Joe, is sold to the William Barrett Travis of Alamo fame, and becomes his personal body servant. The youngest son will have several jobs, if you read his narrative, including working for Elijah Lovejoy, which is really where he learns to read, set type, phrase sentences, though he's not with Elijah Lovejoy that long.
Mm.
Bottom line, he will run away.
Yeah.
And in his narrative, he tells you as he was crossing Ohio, a Quaker man finds him, takes him to his house for 15 days, gets him on his feet, and as he's leaving, ask him what his second name was. And he tells him he didn't have a second name, but his name was William. And the man said, and he said, you can give me a name. And so the man said, I named thee after me. My name is Wells Brown. And this is with thee, William Wells Brown. He is Elizabeth's youngest child. And on the lecture circuit, he mentions several times his illustrious grandfather, Daniel Boone. Now, Joe is down in Texas with William Barrett Travis. Travis wants to make a name for himself, and he picks a fight with Mexico, of all things. But the bottom line is, the Alamo was fought over slavery. Even for Mansfield to take his slaves into Texas, he had to go to the Mexican consulate in New Orleans and change their condition from slaves to indentured servants, only serving a 10-year contract. Now, Elizabeth by this time has 2 children by Mansfield, okay? They're like 2 and 3 when they get to Texas. So understand, under Mexican law, that 2-year-old is free at 12, okay? Period. No ifs, ands, buts, that's it, okay? He's an indentured servant. Well, bottom line, Joe is eventually sold to William Travis, and he will find himself at the Alamo. The Alamo only has 142 people inside it. Mexico had warning to Texas about bringing illegal slaves into Mexico, and they thumb their nose at the Mexicans, and the Mexicans go, all righty. So General Lopez de Santa Anna came to fix that, and he did. And what's interesting to me is that twice he sent riders to the gates to parley, to negotiate. Said, look, lay down your weapons, walk out, I'll let you all live, okay? And they and the Texans go, yeah, whatever, okay? And, got cute about it. The third rider he sent planted a red flag in front of the door. And what that means is there'll be no survivors. And he meant it. We know, of course, the atrocities that went on inside and how people were killed, where they were killed, is because only 3 people are going to walk out of there. A white woman named Susanna, her 18-month-old baby girl named Angelina, and Joe, William Travis's black slave.
I really, so much of the details, just fascinating. I want to end on this note. First, I want to be clear that for people to, kind of get a visual for everything that we've talked about, I know it's been a lot of historical facts here, a lot of information dished out. You can head to marymeachum.org. Again, we're going to put that information up on the screen. It's the 2021 Mary Meachum Celebration, Missouri Slave or Free. And you can watch this production. It's an hour, a little over an hour. And it's really fascinating. It'll give a lot of the visual and storytelling of what we've talked about today. I would be remiss before we wrap things up very briefly, because we're in the month of June now with Juneteenth. And I was saying to you off camera that I feel over the past decade, a lot of pop culture has picked up on the national celebration of Juneteenth. And you mentioned Texas, and briefly, I just wanted to get your take on it. How are you? We're going to end this segment with some events that people can go to on June 19th to celebrate here in the St. Louis area. But what is your take on sort of the sort of national sort of rise in the celebration of Juneteenth, especially since the city and county, St. Louis City and County, have now designated it as an official holiday?
Oh, I have relatives down in Texas in the 40s, 1940s and 50s. It has always been a holiday. Black folks did not work in Texas on Juneteenth. It was watermelon, red soda pop, and fried chicken. That's just what, that was it. It was huge. And they did not work. Everybody in Texas understood that this was a state holiday. And but I brought it to St. Louis over 25 years ago. And for those people who were in St. Louis at that time, think back, Fairgrounds Park, the Miller Sound Express was this massive traveling stage with all of this talent that was Bobby Brown, Jonathan Butler, just hundreds of acts, and it came here for 5 years straight. And I've actually brought we ended the day with fireworks, okay, in Fairgrounds Park. But I got out of the festival business, but people kept asking me then, well, it happened in Texas. Why should we care? Well, first of all, when General Gordon Granger landed in Galveston, he read the first time the Emancipation Proclamation, and that reading freed the largest number of slaves in one reading ever, okay? And I'd like to point out now, since we've talked a little bit about about Missouri slavery in Texas, so many Black bloodlines from Missouri went to Texas, okay? So there has always been, and I would say if you do your genealogy, you know, if you're a person of color, and all of a sudden you've got relatives popping up out west, this is why over 100,000 slaves were taken from here.
It's really a great connection, a really nice connection. Thank you. I feel like we can touch base with you every week about a topic, and it just would never ever get boring. It's great to have historians such as you in our community. I know you both teach in the classroom on the university side, but you also engage the public with events, and it's just such a pleasure to just take a little small kernel of your knowledge today and share it with the public. I know there's so much more, and I look forward to speaking with you again. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, you're welcome. Now, I forgot to mention this to you. Every second Sunday, I am at St. Charles Heritage Museum with a one-woman show called Lila, The Life of a Missouri Slave. Okay. So it's every second Sunday, and it's free to the public, but you do have to have reservations, but it's every second Sunday.
Oh, well, thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that information. Thank you so much. And we can include that too below on our YouTube description. But thank you again for joining us. And for those of you at home, we're going to show you some events coming up to celebrate Juneteenth as well here locally, in case you're interested in checking them out on Saturday, June 19th. Thanks again for watching. Keep it right here on STL TV, Experience St. Louis.